coming out on a cold, windy, yucky night, so I greatly appreciate it. My name's Ann DeMonte. I am the director here at the Audubon we changed our name last year. The Audubon Society of Rhode Island's Nature Center and Aquarium. We used to be the Environmental Education Center. Dr. Weed and I met in last spring. The Pokanoket tribe came and did a family program here at the center, which Sarah helped to organize. And it was a wonderful program, and afterwards he and I got talking a little bit, because here at the Audubon Society, we're always wondering about the land that our facility sits on. We know it was farmland. We know the train station, the train line came through here on what's now the East Bay Bike Path. But we've been to the Bristol Archives and we've been downtown, but no one can actually say to us how this property was used, what it was like before we came. We're always curious. We found bits of pottery and shards and all kinds of cool things over the time they were found on the property. So I was speaking to Dr. Weed about it, and he said, I can tell you all about it. And he sent me all these wonderful maps and all this wonderful information. And I said, you have to come to Audubon and share what you know, and he agreed to come. So we are in for a treat tonight, because I know I'm probably as curious about some of the information he's going to share as some of you are, and about the history of the East Bay. So I'd like to welcome Dr. David Weed, and I'll turn it over to him. So thank you, everybody.
Welcome. Thank you all for coming. If some of you may or may not have a brochure, maybe you want to be sure that everybody does. But plenty here. So I live up the road a piece here in Warren. Takes me about 3.5 minutes to get here, which is really nice. And I thank Ann for her kind invitation. And that occurred when we had the Pokanoket tribe here. In, I think, May, was it? Somewhere along there? June? Yeah. Which was a terrific opportunity, but something that you're going to learn a little bit more about tonight. I live up the road a piece in Warren. If you know Brewers Hill Park, I live in the back corner of Brewers Hill Park, and when the leaves are off the trees, I can see the park every morning when I get up. I've lived there for almost 40 years now, but one day in May of 2017, I woke up and heard the sound of an excavator over there. And I thought, oh, I better go see what's going on. And sure enough, they were digging a hole there. And so I started asking people, why are you digging a hole? Well, you're going to find out the answer. I started back 10, 12 years ago working on a web page because I got interested in the King Philip's War. Anybody read Jill Lepore, Name of War? If you get a chance, it's an excellent book. It's my first introduction to the King Philip War. And out of that, I learned a number of things about that the war started in Warren and ended in Bristol and involved all kinds of communities really across New England, all the way over to Connecticut, up into Maine. It was a terrific event, a terrible event that everyone should learn about because it was the most significant war, the bloodiest war in North America, and a war that changed the face of North America forever. So I got involved with some people who were redoing the Hugh Cole Well. Anybody been to that in Warren? It's behind the Kickamiota Middle School on the bike path just before the Broken Bridge. Nobody goes there. We're going to fix the Broken Bridge shortly, and you'll be able to get there more easily from both sides. But that was a significant place because it was the well that Hugh Cole, who grew up in Plymouth in the 1630s, and then settled in Warren. He was the first English person to live in Warren, not the first person. There were thousands of people who lived here, but he was the first English person who moved here. So we redid the plaque on the monument with the help of the family there, the Cole family, because people had taken the bronze plaque off years ago, melted down for money or whatever. So we put a plastic one up there. They've only pried it off twice now. We've continued to find it. And then I met this woman right here, Helen Trader. Helen was a person very much interested in land conservation, lives in Barrington, and she did a couple presentations on what she called the Sowams Heritage Area. Now, I'd never heard that concept before, but I listened to her at one of the meetings of the Warren Preservation Society and thought, well, this is interesting, but little did I know how involved I was going to be about that. What she was talking about was the area right around here that was occupied by the Pokanoket tribe. Okay, how many have heard that name before, Pokanoket? Oh, good, because most people hear this name, Wampanoag, right? Well, it turns out the name Wampanoag wasn't in use until 1702. It doesn't occur in the literature anywhere, and if you look at any map prior to that, like, well, this is Bicknell's map, which was in, much later, 1908, but you will see the name Pokanoket, see that in the circle up there? And that name Pokanoket meant a number of things, but it was the southern area and was also the home of the Massasoit. Most people hear Massasoit like that's his name. It's not his name, it's his title, like president. His name was Osamiquin, meaning yellow feather. So the proper way to refer to him is the Massasoit Osamiquin, because there were other Massasoits both before and after him. It's like President Truman, Massasoit Osamiquin. Okay? And he led over 60 tribes in an area that went all the way up to the Charles River near Boston, what's today Boston, and out to the Cape. It's a little hard to see the yellow in this map, but this whole area, plus Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, but not the Cape. The Cape was occupied by other tribes, one of which has since become known as the Mashpee tribe. They were a tribe that allied with the English during the King Philip War, so they weren't against the English during the King Philip War. And they got rewarded with a nice reservation, and now today you will hear nothing but Wampanoag, the name they've acquired, and since their federal recognition in 2007. But the true tribe who was here and is still here is the Pokanoket tribe. Okay? And we'll learn a little bit more about them, but these are people who have lived in this area for at least 10,000 years. I was with an archaeologist last night from the public archaeology lab in Pawtucket, and she's been going around looking for artifacts in Swansea for the last 10 years, of which there are many, because there were literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who lived right around here, within 5 miles of here, over the course of that 10,000 years. So we know it's 10,000 because we found artifacts from that period of time. We also know that no one could have been here 12,000 years ago because there was a mile of ice here, okay? So it pretty well narrows it down to the period of time that people were here, and they were hunter-gatherers for the most part, and lived a very successful life as far as we know. They weren't disturbed by anything. They didn't have mass starvations, global warfare, or any of the problems like global warming that we're confronted with, okay? And things were good until the 1500s when these floating islands began arriving, okay? Well, they thought that was a pretty good deal because the floating islands brought people, men, who came over to trade and offered all kinds of items made of metal, ceramic, or woven fabric that they did not have. So that gave them a much greater access to things that they needed in exchange for things they didn't need, such as furs, okay? They had plenty of those. They hunted all the time, so they had an excess of that. What a good deal there to do that kind of trading. Until 1616. all along the coast of Massachusetts, and in particular in the village settlement they call Patuxent, we call Plymouth. When an outbreak of any one of a number of diseases, and we don't know what they are, but you name it, it could be measles, smallpox, yellow fever, bubonic plague, that wiped out 90% of the population along the coast. People were so affected by that that when the pilgrims arrived, they found nothing but bleached bones on the ground. There weren't enough people left alive to bury the dead. It was as if a nuclear bomb went off there, okay? Imagine if everybody in Bristol and Warren and Barrington died over 3 years period of time and simply left what was there. That's what the people from Plymouth found. Now the people from Plymouth were not the usual traders. Why not? It wasn't just men. They brought women and children. So the Massasoit, who was living, some would say in what is now Warren, others would say what's now Barrington, but somewhere very close by here in a settlement called Sowams, became very interested in this particular group who came over because they had something he needed. Remember, he had lost 90% of his population, including his warriors, and these people had something that no other tribe had. He had guns and cannons, and he figured, these are the people I need to ally with in order to keep the Narragansetts who are breathing down my neck and want to move into this area. They had already occupied the territory we now know as Providence, and they would love to come into this area. So he made a deal with them. He created an opportunity when he brought 60 of his warriors to Plymouth on March 22nd, 1621. Showed up there. We don't know what he looks like. These are a couple of imaginary, one is the statue that you see down in Plymouth, the other is a painting done by Ruth Major showing him in the red horseman's jacket that he received from the governor in Plymouth. So they had a meeting in Plymouth, and it's well recorded, well documented. Ed Winslow, who was kind of their Secretary of State, wrote about all of this, and you can read it anytime in Mort's Relation. It's on the web, easy to find, and it gives a very detailed history of this encounter. And in that, they struck an agreement now known as the Wampanoag Treaty. What's wrong with that name? Were they the Wampanoags? No. It should say the Pokanoket Treaty. And the Pokanoket tribe today is not happy about this, okay? But it was a treaty nonetheless, and one that made a big difference because it guaranteed protection on both sides, that if the Narragansetts were to bother the Pokanokets, the English would help and intervene, and vice versa. And there were a number of occasions in the 1600s in which that protection was needed. So Ed Winslow thought, well, this is a good deal. I'll come down here and meet this fellow, Osamequin. So he and Hampton and a guide who spoke some rudimentary English left Plymouth in probably late June, early July, not certain about the date, and walked for 2 days down to Plymouth. Try that sometime. Okay. Yeah. In fact, I was just a week ago, I was out at Winslow Point on the Taunton River. That's where we think they crossed because we know that the tribe had moshoons or hollowed out wood canoes on both sides there, and they often use that as a crossing point. But he got here, and again, this story is well detailed in Mort's Relation. You can read the whole thing in great detail. The travel and the accommodations at Sowams and his meeting of the Massasoit. And it was a successful meeting. They bonded with that, and even though it was a little warm and they were suffering from flea bites and everything else, they went back to Plymouth satisfied that they had met the guy who they made this connection with. Remember, there were very few tribe people on the coast at that point. They had all died. So most of the tribe was right around here. So, here we are at the Roger Williams Memorial. Inside you'll see a painting by Gene Blackburn, contemporary painting of what we think Providence looked like in the early days, 1650. This is North Main Street. In the background here is what is Smith Hill, which now is the State House. And in the very back here, you'll see Newtoconachet Hill. How many people have been to Newtoconachet Hill? Oh, good. Okay. You must be interested in nature because it's a great place. Wonderful place. Oh, you used to live there. No wonder. Okay, but I had never been there and never knew anything about it. Well, that's the western boundary of Providence, the land that Canonicus gave to Roger Williams. And it also was the place where tribes from the Massachusetts tribe, the Nipmuc in the north and west of Providence, the Narragansett, and the Pokanoket would have council and meet together there. And if you go up there on Saturday, depending on the rain, and maybe Sunday, I'll be leading a talk there, a walk with people who are going to be at the Newtoconachet Hill Conservancy program that will be Saturday noon to 3 or Sunday noon to 3 if it's raining on Saturday. But that's a good place to get an idea of this terrific land here because it's almost 300 feet high there and you get these fabulous views of Providence from there, right? Okay. So it's an undiscovered place for most people, don't know a thing about it. A very historic place though from the perspective of Native people. There were a lot of changes after Roger in terms of the land. We know that Rehoboth was the first land purchase in 1643, along with the purchase of Wanamoyset in 1645 by John Brown. You can find a marker for that on Pawtucket Avenue if you go over to Riverside. You have to know where to look, go on the website, it'll tell you where to go. Well, I'm not going to go through all these because it's complicated and I get lost going through it all, but basically we had Wampanoag lands that went up to the Rehoboth boundary at first, and then we had Swansea in 1667. That's when you see the sign going into Swansea, so 67, sorry, before the King Philip War. But that land went all the way across the Providence River. It did not include Bristol down here. In fact, this line right here is Franklin Street in Warren, where there used to be a fence to keep the English animals out of native territory. Okay? Then there were other sales, 1717 to 1746. There was a huge dispute, court settlement, etc. The land was first Barrington and Swansea. Then Warren took over much of Barrington, and then Swansea struck its line. And then you see this funny line here, okay, which I thought, well, that's a strange line. Usually borders are made up of rivers or other natural places. This is a line that looks like it was drawn on a map with a ruler. Guess what? It was drawn on a map with a ruler. No one even surveyed the land. I went down and looked at the original survey maps. They had no idea where it was. And you go right through farm fields and all kinds of strange places. But that was the agreement to separate Bristol County, Massachusetts from Bristol County, Rhode Island. And we've been living with that since 1770. If you want to see the first settlement, English settlement, not the first settlement, the first English settlement was 1643 in Rehoboth, at a place now occupied by the Newman Church. I don't know if anybody's ever stopped there. There's a nice marker across the street and a cemetery with people who lived here in 1643. Some of them are buried there, particularly the Carpenters. But that was the center of the Ring of the Green. Have you heard of that? It's just to let you know about commons and people had their places around the commons. Well, this town common was huge. It's like half a mile long. So that the property lines would extend out from the common all the way either to the 10-mile river or over to the Seekonk River. So everybody had access to wood and water, okay, and the common where they could raise their animals together. All right? Pretty good deal, right? Wait till you see what happened. Not far from there is Hunts Mills. Anybody been there? I'd never heard of it. It's off Pleasant Street, and it's the headquarters of the East Providence Historical Society. But you go in there and you'll see these historic markers about the original mills there. There's nothing from the 17th century there, but there's a marker talking about the mills that started in 1643 along the 10-mile river, which is a great river. You can hike along it, you can fish in it. Okay? Wonderful place, right in the middle of East Providence. Who knew? Go up to Rehoboth, present-day Rehoboth. We know that Rehoboth was divided first into Seekonk and Rehoboth, and then Seekonk was divided into East Providence, but it was all Rehoboth back then. And they had mills there, none of them from the 17th century, but you get some idea of what was taking place there. And you'll see signs around town if you notice them and can pull off those narrow roads and stop and look to read them. But there are pictures about some of the garrison houses that were established during the King Philip War there. Well, the King Philip War, as I mentioned earlier, was a devastating event. This is a map I put together for my King Philip War website, and what it illustrates is you've got the peninsula where you're sitting right now about here, with Mount Hope down here, a settlement, the Papasquash settlement, we believe, was about there. We also know there's a big settlement that had been for centuries along the Kickapoo River at the Narrows there. And that's been archaeologized. But then English settlements. Here's Hugh Cole's place, his first place, the second place. Other places over, this is the Garrison House over in Swansea. Miles Garrison that was connected with John Miles, who came down and started the First Baptist Church in Massachusetts. Up by the Rollins River, over at Providence, way up the Blackstone, with Blackstone and his settlement over here at Warwick. If I had the rest of the map, you'd see Newport, which was a big English settlement. So, in effect, by the outbreak of the war in 1675, the population of Native people had gone from about 70,000 in 1620 to about 7,000, okay, by 1675. And by the outbreak of the war, there were fewer than 700 people left here. Why? The same reason as 1616, disease. There were a number of outbreaks, and the population of native people was going down and down and down. Meanwhile, the English population was exploding. Remember, in 1630, they had a flotilla of 10 ships that came over, brought over 300 people just in one voyage. And that population continued over time. So by the outbreak of the war, there were over 50,000 English people here, and yet only 700 Native people left. What happens when you think you're about to disappear? What do you start thinking about? You see everybody around you dying. You see this strange population of people from Europe coming and taking over all your land. You see your population shrinking. Well, maybe you think it's time to do something. Well, that's what happened. King Philip War broke out. Probably on, we think, along Child Street in the first shot in Warren there, not far from the Kickapoo River there. It's a little hazy in terms of exactly where. But that first shot resulted in warriors beginning to burn villages all the way up to Deerfield, Massachusetts. The militia from the Massachusetts Bay Company came down at Miles Garrison. You can find a marker there for that. went down Route 136 down to Mount Hope thinking they would catch Philip. You think Philip was going to just sit there? Of course not. He knew they were coming. So he and his warriors and everyone took off. When church came down there with the militia, there was nobody there. He had already left, gone over to Tiverton, and then went up along the Watapa Pond and then the Maori Path and crossed the Taunton River, and before you know it, he was up doing damage all the way up to Deerfield there. So the English did not get a handle on that war. You can read all about that. There's wonderful accounts, and I'm not going to go into all that detail. But essentially, that war, which went on for 14 months, did amazing devastation to both sides. Probably the most significant event was the Great Swamp Massacre in December of 1675 down in South Kingston, somewhere down there. You can go find it if you're willing to walk a mile in, and you won't see much except a monument, and the monument is all to the English people and what wonderful things they did. They burned 600 men, women, and children. Isn't that nice? That so enraged the Narragansetts, who had stayed out of the war up until that point, that they decided they were going to fight the English too. So by the winter of 76, things were not looking good for the English. They had all kinds of tribes involved against them in the war. Most of the population had left, gone back to either Boston or Newport, and some of them even went back to England. It could have been the end of English New England, okay? But tribes began running out of ammunition because they had no sources for that, began running out of food because it was the middle of the winter, they couldn't grow crops. And church changed its tactics to using more guerrilla-style fighting rather than the standard English stand and shoot kind of stuff. So by the spring, things were moving toward the English side. And it wasn't long before they managed to chase King Philip, the Massasoit son, down to the miry swamp. You can find a marker for that down in on Mount Hope Farm. He was shot by a native person called John Audubon, who was not too happy with King Philip because Philip had already murdered his brother, so in the war. Audubon was a praying Indian, Christianized Indian. That's why he was on church's side. So there's the path of the war. After the war, people who weren't killed were enslaved, many of them sent to Barbados. Some of them killed themselves because they didn't want to be enslaved. You can find the marker. If you go up, where Barneyville is and the Bungtown Bridge, the Miles Bridge, kind of a strange borderland area between Barrington and Swansea. And it's a little isolated marker there, and it just tells you that a whole bunch of people died at the garrison there. This is the marker for Philip, and this is a little hard to get to. You have to go to the Mount Hope Farm office, ask for permission, walk about 2 miles, and you'll find it in the woods there. But that's where Philip was after he was shot. Was drawn and quartered, and his head chopped off and put on a pike and taken up to Plymouth for the next 20 years. Church finally captured Anawan, Philip's general, and they met at Anawan Rock up in Rehoboth. You can walk in there and see this place. It's supposed to be haunted now. Good for Halloween, right? Had a nice conversation with him over a campfire that night, sent him up to Plymouth, and they hung him. You can find a lot of other places around here from the 17th century. If you go on the website, you'll find all kinds of references and maps and tell you where to go, all this kind of stuff. You can even do it on your phone. There's an interactive map. Click on there and it'll take you right to the page. But I've been exploring and finding over 50 locations around here that I had no idea existed. The one that I'm most interested in is the Little Neck Cemetery up in Riverside, in the back eddy of a neighborhood. It's difficult to find, let me tell you, but once you get there, you'll see the grave sites of Tom Willett, who was the first settler who signed the Wanawaisit Agreement in 1643. He became mayor of New York City, not once but twice. Why? He spoke Dutch. It was New Amsterdam. Over here on Serpentine Road in Warren is the cemetery with some of the soldiers from that war, from the King Philip War. John Miles, who was at the Miles Garrison and started the church from Wales. That's over at Tyler Point. Other cemeteries up in Swansea, Rehoboth, and Route 136 just past Choppies. If you go up there in Warren, you'll find that wonderful cemetery. You do some looking, you find things, right? You'll also find some farms that have existed since that time. Go down to Twisted and talk to Byron Key. His farm was from, he says 1625. I said, Byron, no, it wasn't 1625. But in any case, it's been there a long time, and he finds native tools there on his property. You go up to East Providence, the Brigham Farm, that's been there forever, never been developed, is what I'm saying. That's a wonderful place to walk around. Joetta Kirk at the Chase Farm, both these pictures on the bottom, it's on the far end of Birch Swamp Road, just at the Swansea border there. But that is a wonderful farm. You'll go by an ancient oak tree that's at least 400 years old there. So it was there at the time. Her family got the farm as a King's Grant at 1693. Over in Barrington, wonderful places. If you haven't been to Sowams Woods, now you know what Sowams is. Go over there and walk around, it's terrific. Hampton Woods, remember John Hampton who came down with Ed Winslow? Well, there's a whole trail right in the middle, just to the west of Sowams Road in Barrington. Wonderful place to walk. Kids walk through there all the time on the way to school. And then you have no excuse if you haven't been over to Wayposset Preserve in Bristol, the end of Narrows Road. Okay, anybody been there? Yeah, I hadn't either. But go down Narrows Road toward the Kickapoo River, and at the end of the road, there's a nice area where you could launch a boat, but they have a better boat launch further south there. But if you go down there, that's the Narrows. That was the area that they did an archaeological dig about 20 years ago. So they verified that there were thousands of people living there for thousands of years. Though you can't go to the dig, they don't want you to know exactly where that is. You can't walk into the woods there, and it's great, terrific, untouched woods. And not to say it's the same trees that were there 400 years ago, but you can get a feel for what life must have been like around here at that point in time. You go by this spot every day on Route 136. How many people go to Johnson's Market there? Good. Well, the rest of you should go. It's a great market. I know Tim well because he owns half of this rock on his property just south of, on the west side, just south of Johnson's Market. Just at in fact, the Warren-Swansea line goes right through the rock. Well, why is that rock so important? That's the National Grinding Stone. That's the place where Native women used to grind their corn by rolling a rock along the top. Here, there's a groove there. If you climb up there, it's a little overgrown right now. You'll find a groove filled with moss, etc. That took place there. And then across the street, particularly when the brambles and stuff along the fence there die out, you'll notice this rock here, right? And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting what that is. So I checked with the state archaeologist, Tim Ives, and said, hey, Tim, what's with this rock there? Is that an ancient native rock? He said, no, it's a glacial erratic. I said, yeah, I know, Tim. Those are big stones that the glaciers brought down from Canada, and they just, when the glaciers melted, they just dropped there one thing or another. But tell me, Tim, why are there stones underneath this rock? Glaciers don't do that. People do. If you go up there, you'll see a bunch of stones, okay? He said, oh, it's probably a bunch of college kids. I said, no, Tim. College kids have better things to do than getting 25 of them together and spending weeks trying to roll this rock from some other location. No way, Okay, not going to happen. Sure, they'll paint something on there, but that's on bedrock. And I said, you know, this looks a lot like what's called a balanced or perched rock that occur all over New England, that were placed there by native people because you now have a rock that has a point and a direction that helps you orient to the stars at night, to the sun in the vernal equinox during the daytime, and on bedrock at the top of a knoll, Sowams Knoll there, okay, that connects with the underworld. Not hell, but the belief was that there's an underworld that controls things in the upper world, okay? So this is a native sacred site. So I'm trying to, the woman I talked to just last night from the public archaeology lab put me in touch with a guy from the Narragansett tribes who thinks he can come and tell me for certain that's what it is. But that's my theory, okay? Prove me wrong. Go behind City Hall and the Town Hall in Swansea, you'll find Abrams Rock. Up here in Mount Hope, you'll find King Philip's Sea. And go up to Nunaconicut Hill, and you'll find the meeting place of the 4 tribes where they used to hold that. Well, back to town here, and I'll wrap up with what's going on in Bristol. After the war, did the native people sign a treaty and get an exchange? They're not really a payment, but you know, did they voluntarily give up their land here? Anybody live in Bristol? Where'd your land come from? Came from the king. Okay, King Charles decided that after the war, that land should go to the English, right? Because we got rid of those Pokanokets, right? In fact, we had laws that if you were Pokanoket, you couldn't speak the language, you couldn't call yourself Pokanoket. And if you were still alive here, if you ever uttered the word or said you were Pokanoket, you could be shot on sight, and lots of them were. So the land went to the English, to 4 proprietors here. I can't remember all their names, but if you look them up, it's easy to find them. Here they are. Nathaniel Bible, Stephen Burton, Nathaniel Oliver, and John Lawley. There you go. How's that? They purchased large sectors. They basically divided the peninsula into 4, and then they sold off land to English people who wanted land here, and then used the money to pay war debts from the King Philip War. Okay, so that's how your property got here. Okay, so it was a farm here purchased from one of these proprietors, right? And the town was laid out in good English fashion. This is the only town, you know, that's laid out in a grid like this anywhere in Rhode Island. Okay. You've been by some of these houses? Okay, you go by this one all the time. It's right on Hope Street, across from Sip and Dip there. All right, it's apartment buildings, not, you know. And I thought, oh, there's a joke. Somebody put a sign up, 1680, ha ha ha. It's true. It was the first house ever built here. Okay, built with wood brought over from England. All right. Why? Because if you're going to have a town, you have to have a church. If you're going to have a church, you have to have a pastor. If you're going to have a pastor, you have to have a parsonage. So they built a parsonage. They got a pastor, Nathaniel Bosworth, who started church services in his house, in that house. And then in 4 years, they built the first church, which looked, we think, sort of like that on the town common. All right, not there now. The State House is there now. But that enabled the town to become a real town, to govern itself, because you had a church, after all. This was Massachusetts and not Roger Williams' idea of a state. Okay, the church and the government were the same here, right? And this is, that house looked like that at about the turn of the 20th century. It was called Silver Spring, right? Someday we'll get somebody to buy the place and restore it. Wouldn't that be nice? You can go over to the church, though, that's on High Street, the First Congregational Church. And if you ask somebody there, they'll let you into their museum, and you can see some of these things, like a pew inn from 1684, silver chalice set that they keep locked up, some of the early writings from that time, And the grave markers, not the graves. The graves, all the dead people from that period of time are still under the town square right now, where the playground equipment is. Okay, they just moved the stones away. They're across the street over there. The bodies are still underground. Don't go digging. The other places you'll find in town are Joseph Reynolds' house. You can drive down down Hope Street. It's on the left there. Can't miss it. Oldest three-story house in Rhode Island. Wonderful place. I finally got into it a couple weeks ago where they did the house tours. It's a fabulous house. And then the third house is just a piece of Elm Farm, this back end piece here, this section that was actually moved from another place in 1695. Those are the only three pre-1700 houses in Bristol, unless somebody's got one that I don't know about. In Warren, Hellnoon's Farm, right up on Route 136, across from Choppy's, if you know where that is. Tillis and Pearson, right there, okay. That Country Inn used to be up there, okay. Also from 1682, we think. I've been in it. Unfortunately, it's just a rental situation now. John Martin House, it's been for sale if you want to buy one. First oldest house in Barrington. John Martin House in Swansea. If you haven't been there yet, wait till next July, and on Sunday afternoons 1 to 4, the Colonial Dames will let you in there, and you can get a little tour for $5, okay? Get to see how people were living. That house says 1728, but Carl Becker from the Swansea Historical Society says, no, there was a house there before 1700. And William Hunt House, the oldest one in Seacon, and the Kingsley House on Pleasant Street in Rehoboth. That's it. There are only 10 houses before 1700 across these 8 towns. None in Providence. Providence was burned during the King Philip War. Okay. You can go to the Stephen Hopkins house, which was 1714, which is a good way to see what houses might have been like at that period of time. But nothing existed then. Well, just to wrap up, here I am back at Burrs Hill Park, where I told you they dug something up. Well, they dug a hole and they put a vault in the hole. 10 by 10 foot concrete crypt. Anybody want to guess what they put in that crypt, in that vault? The remains of
Sowams, which we don't know how to say it.
Right. How do we know it was Osamequin who was buried there?
We don't.
Well, we don't know for certain. We don't have DNA evidence or anything of that sort. But Virginia Baker reported back in the turn of the 20th century that one of the graves was disinterred and they found a red horseman's coat collar in there. So it's pretty good evidence that that was Osamequin's grave, because he wouldn't have given that away. And that was known as a royal burial ground. Okay, so other chiefs were buried there, which is why most of the grave sites had all kinds of goods in them: English pottery, stone knives, pots, combs, keys, you name it. Why all that English stuff? Well, in the late 1500s, early 1600s, if you were a native person and you had traded, those would be very valuable objects. And when you died, you wanted to take some of those valuable objects to the next life, so they would be buried with you. And if you'd like to know all about that, Susan Gibson published a great book in 1980. Has a picture of my house in it, actually, and which she documents all this stuff. She had gone around to the museums because in 1913, Charles Carr, the town librarian at the George Hale Library, who was an amateur archaeologist, got tired of all these stories of people digging up bodies and stuff in this grave, and they didn't know what these graves were. People thought it was African American graves. They weren't marked, had no idea what was there. It was very different than the way it is now. It was high sand hills. I've got a picture from the turn of the 20th century that it was taken from the top of a sand mound. It's 30 feet up in the air from where the parking lot is now. Okay, so it was Burrs Hills, which was like sand dunes. People say, oh, those mounds over there, those are Indian burial mounds. No, they aren't. They're just mounds of sand that the native people used to bury people simply because all the tools you had were clamshell hose. Okay, you couldn't get more. Try going out here and digging 6 inches down here. With the rocks and roots, you won't get anywhere. Okay, but in a sandy, gravelly area like that, they could bury people, and they would be facing the southwest, where the setting sun is, not over Narragansett land, over Adams Point there. And that's where they honored their dead. So there was a big celebration by the Mashpees in May 15th of 2017, which I joined in, and if you go on the website, you can see the video and learn all about that and see some of the other things, some of the things that are buried there, etc. Today I work with the Pokanoket tribe, who are alive and well. No, they didn't disappear as much as everyone tried to. We tried to get rid of Native American people altogether in the 1880s. We passed a law that said you couldn't be Native American. You had to be white, black, or something else, but you couldn't be Native American. That got overturned, thank God. There are thousands of Native American people. This is the current tribal council. This is the Sagamore for the tribe. Here they are up in Mount Hope. They meet over there every year for a Strawberry Thanksgiving Festival on the grounds of Mount Hope Farm. You can go to all kinds of tribal gatherings. The most recent one was just 2 weeks ago down at Roger Williams Memorial. Every year in September, you will find the big drum powwow right there at the Roger Williams Memorial. Please stop in, join in, listen, talk, dance, do whatever you want. It's a great chance for people who say, well, I don't know, I've never met an Indian. Well, they're there, okay? Good chance to meet them, all right? And here's some other folks I'm working with as well. So we're in the process of creating a heritage area. Anybody heard of the Blackstone Valley Heritage Area corridor? Okay, well, we want to do the same thing. Theirs goes all the way up to Worcester. We want to start in Providence and go down to Bristol, include Rehoboth, Seacon, and Swansea in that, so it'll be 8 towns. And in order for that to happen, a lot of people like you need to know about this and talk it up and tell other people about it. Take some brochures with you, tell everybody you know, oh, I just found out about the Sowams Heritage Area, go on the website, learn more about it. Then we'll get some businesses involved, because what happens when you have a tourist area? People want to come, okay? And there's extras, okay? So we promote that. We'll get the either Dave Cicilline to put in a bill with Congress, and once you get approved, it's a 7 or 8 year process. Then the feds will pay you $300,000 a year forever. Okay, not a bad deal. There are 54 of these areas around the country. Why can't we be one of them? We also have some visitors coming here. Next year, what's happening? 2020, 1620, 400 years. Okay. 7 to 9 million visitors going to come to Plymouth next year.
Wow.
Okay, not just from the U.S. They've got programs already and exhibits in Leiden, Amsterdam, Holland, and in Plymouth, England, that have been going on for more than a year. I've worked with the Tour Trends director. They're directing people over here, and we want to get some busloads of people to come down here and learn about Sowams, the heritage area, learn about Osamequin, learn about the treaty, learn about how the 2 groups survived by helping each other for 50 years of peace here. We wouldn't be here, we'd be speaking Dutch or French or something else if it weren't for that relationship. And we want to tell the rest of the story. Put this on your calendar. Right now we're thinking June 28th, sometime around the 4th of July. We might actually do it on the 5th of July. We haven't nailed that down completely. But over at Burrs Hill Park, the Pokanoket tribe will be there, and we're going to do a whole big celebration there called Before the Mayflower. And then every year after that, we're going to do After the Mayflower, and at both Native and colonial English exhibits there. All kinds of fun stuff. Okay, I think that's it. If you want to learn more, go on the website, you'll find these 50 areas.